I was waiting for the one. Obviously, that was not the right move. Good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Stephanie Sullivan, the Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Leading and Learning, and basically the coordinator more than anything else. Before I turn it over to Mrs. Slack, though, I just want to express my gratitude. Each one of you volunteered to be a part of this really important process. And many community members, along with, of course, relevant staff. And I know a commitment like this isn't small. And so I really appreciate it. Appreciate your flexibility with our hurricane situation. And hopefully that had minimal impact on everyone. And so just a couple little things. One of our committee members, through a series of unfortunate events, couldn't be here today. And we gave her the opportunity to phone in or have a statement read. And she asked for a statement to be read when the time comes. She is aware that that means she is a non-voting member today, because you do have to participate fully to vote. And so because of just the compounding conflicts, she was not able to call in either. And of course, we wish her well. Just wanted to make you aware, so that's why it's one person smaller. But when the time comes, I will read her statement on her behalf. And this is a recorded meeting, and we are recording it for the benefit of public record. And so it's important that you speak into the mic at any point in time when you speak. And so the microphones just have that basic push-up feature. And so at any point in time when the committee gets to the deliberation point, just please make sure at all times you have your mic on and you're speaking into the mic so that we can have a clear record of this meeting. And other than that, again, I really appreciate your time. I'm going to turn it over to Missy Slack, who is a book reading member of the committee, but a non-voting member of the committee, to just facilitate the process. I'm going to be around just for any questions, because it's our first time. And so as we are really cementing a process, things may come up that we didn't think about. So it's formal, yet not that formal at the same time. And so we want to make sure that all the committee members feel comfortable and any questions are asked. Mr. Gibbs is available if we need him, and he's our attorney, and we're just going to work together and do good things. And so thank you so much, and I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Slack.
Thank you. All right, let's see. Can you hear me now? Okay. This is for the book reconsideration meeting for House of Earth and Blood by Sarah Moss. Today's October 20th, 2022. Good morning and welcome. I am Missy Slatt, Brevard Public Schools Library Media Content Specialist, K-12. I will facilitate today's meeting, but as she said, I do not have a vote. So please stand for the pledge, and it's over in the corner there. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty. Thank you. We are here this morning to reconsider the book of House of Earth and Blood, written by Sarah Moss. I want to take this opportunity to remind the public that the appropriate place for public participation in this meeting is during the independent public comment as identified in the agenda. Outside of the individual public comments opportunity, your role in the meeting is as an observer. I'd like to invite the petitioner, Michelle Beavers, to speak. You will have 10 minutes, Mrs. Beavers. The clock will be set for you so you may track your time. Please make your comments to the committee and please speak into the microphone. You can go to the podium. Yes, please. Thank you. And wait for Dr. Sullivan. She's going to start the clock for you, okay? So you can mark your time. Thank you.
No problem. You don't have to hurry. I'll wait.
I'll give everyone a chance to get settled in.
Of course.
Yes.
Hello, committee members, and thank you for taking on this volunteer task. I would like to first put to rest some misinformation. I'm not here to try to ban a book. I'm asking for a book to be challenged against what our laws state is appropriate for our schools. This The Book of House and Blood is available in the adult section of the public library, meant for public access. Is a great place for it, but not in our schools. The book is rich in detail and has great character depth. It's not a bad book for adults. The issue you're being asked to decide on is if this book should be our children's public libraries, school libraries, excuse me, where we all expect it to be a safe space for our children. Also, the second thing I'm here to tell you is I'm not against Mrs. Sarah Moss. She's a great writer, prolific writer. She has a lot of great books for kids. Unfortunately, this one was her first book she wrote for adults, not for children. If your kids are like mine, they wanted to grow up and be considered adults when they're about 9 years old. It's a constant battle, and so they love the idea of being called a young adult when they read these books. The Library Association has designated young adult to mean between the ages of 12 and 18. So it's kind of confusing because I wouldn't consider my children young adults between the ages of 12 and 18. Even though when they defined it, you can't sign legal documents when you're 12 to 17, and you can't see an R-rated movie. So that whole term of young adult is kind of confusing to a lot of people when they start looking at these books. It brings me to another category called new adult. Some of these books are classified as new adult. These novels focus on people that are between the ages of 18 and 25. These books tend to stress more adult subject matter, more stories that revolve around careers, entering adulthood, sexuality, relationships, mental health, abuse, and trauma. If you go to your preferred search engine and search the words new adult novels, you're going to find a lot of books that are designed to sexually excite you. That seems to be the vast majority of those novels. Here's an interview I'd like to read for a little bit that Ms. Moss gave regarding the book House of Earth and Blood. Some sentences have been taken out for readability. Interviewer, what was different about writing this versus earlier books? Did you notice a difference in addition to the sexy times between writing this and your prior series? Mrs. Moss, not really. I mean, it's been asked this question a lot, and I've been doing media for Crescent City. There wasn't much difference beyond the fact that I could get away with saying fuck like 10 times on a page if I wanted to. There were so many fucks in this novel that my editor and I had to go through it and just switch it up every now and then for some variation. Interview, did they control F for fucks? And they're like, Sarah, we've counted 500 fucks in this manuscript right now? Miss Moss, yes. Yeah, I mean, it was cool because it was one of the first times where it was just like, fuck this, fuck that, motherfucker, blah, blah, blah. And I wasn't like, uh-oh, can I get away with it? And instead, the issue was just finding some variations of, swear words to use. But there wasn't much difference. YA books, young adult books, are just as complex and deep as adult books out there. And when it comes to writing Crescent City, my process was basically the same as it was for my young adult books. My Court of Thorns and Roses books are definitely for an older audience. I mean, I originally sold those as new adult books. But new adult didn't really become a thing like a section in Barnes & Noble. So my publisher was the one who made the decision to shelve it as a YA. But the content in A Court of Thorns and Roses is very graphic. I mean, when the second book in The Court of Thorns and Roses came out, which is, just a side note, that's The Court of Mist and Fury, there's a 3-day sex marathon in that book. That's the end of the interview that I'm going to quote. So you can see that the publisher has based classifying some of these books simply on how well it's going to sell in a setting like Barnes & Noble, and not truly on the content of the book. So we're putting books that were actually designed for a new adult into the hands of 13 to 17-year-old children. A new adult, let me remind you, is 18 to 25. Moss agreed to publish the trilogy of Court of Thorns and Roses as a young adult, so long as her editor didn't censor any of the sexual content. The Court of Thorns and Roses series was originally a YA classification, but it's now firmly classified as a new adult, meaning 18 to 25. However, Brevard still classifies this book as a young adult, and it's in our libraries. It was never Mrs. Moss's intent to market House of Earth and Blood, the young adult, or the new adult crowd. She published this as an adult novel, period. Our own school district has it listed as an adult novel. Our own school district in Brevard lists this book as an adult novel, not a young adult novel. So I'm still confused on why it would be in our library, because it's supposed to be age-appropriate material. And here's the problem. A reader gets hooked when they read books. My daughter is a prolific reader. She loves reading. And she can trust an author, and she looks at an author, and she keeps reading down that author's books. And all of a sudden in our library, we go from a young adult book that was targeted to young adults to a book targeted to adults. And there's no warning to these kids that they're about to open something that was not written for their age group and their age level, because there's no way for them to know that in our public school library where it's supposed to be a safe space. Not knowing the difference, the child starts reading, and these books are designed to stimulate sexual thought in the brain, sexual excitement. It's just one scene, so they read past it. Then there's another, and another, and another, and all of a sudden they've got hooked into looking for material that stimulates the brain. We don't really know to what extent we are causing damage, nor do we know the future impact of doing this real damage to their brains. This is why I'm so passionate about this subject. So I ask you, committee members, to what end? There are so many great books out there and so little time to get them all read. Do we need to put this material in front of our children? We should have a place free of concern in our public school libraries, because this material is definitely available in our public libraries and can be accessed there if that's what the kids want to go do with their parents. I'd like to remind you the statute harmful to minors and what it means. I've actually given you a handout and I've highlighted that. And the three important parts of that is predominantly appeals to prurient, shameful, or morbid interests. I think we can agree that this book was designed to do that, to encourage an excessive interest in sexual matters. The second part of that is predominantly patently offensive to prevailing standards in the adult community as a whole, respect what's suitable and conduct for minors. And since this is classified as an adult book, and our school agrees it's an adult book, Brevard Schools agrees it's an adult book, I don't think it's in the right place. Because if it were classified for kids, it should be in the library. Taken as a whole, without serious literary, artistic, political, and scientific value for minors, is a third prong on this. And I would have to say, with the use of the F word prominently throughout this book, it's not what we want our kids to be modeling, but also the sexual excitement that is in this book, I don't feel is a good idea. According to our law, which the gist of our law is that we don't have this in front of our children. So I want to read you an excerpt from this so you can understand what I'm trying to show you about how sexualizing this is. You ready to do this? God's yes, she breathed. And then he kissed just beneath the ear, making her back arch slightly. He said, I recall you promising to fuck me until I couldn't remember my own name. He shifted his hips, grinding his cock into her, searching, searing her even with the clothing still between them. If that's what you want, sweetheart, that's what I'll give you. Oh, gods, she couldn't get a solid breath down, couldn't think about his roving mouth on her neck and his hands and that massive, beautiful cock digging into her. She had to get inside her. She had to get him inside her right now. She needed to feel him, needed to have his heat and his strength, and strength around her, in her. Now, if that's not designed to try to get you sexually excited, I don't really know what is. There are many similar scenes designed to stimulate the brain response. And I ask you to ask yourselves, do the kids in school trying to learn math, science, social studies, a foreign language, history, and skills to help them become productive adults need this, to stumble upon this in their library? They're trying to find a book to escape and have fun with, and there are plenty of fantasy books out there that do not include this material. Once they've read it, once they've started reading it, it's very hard to put a book down and just ignore it. There's a study out there that talks about how, gosh, I thought I had it highlighted in here, but I don't seem to see where I put it. Talks about how sexual addiction is the same as methamphetamines and obesity. It actually changes the chemical pathways in the brain. We're doing permanent damage when we allow this to go on. Let's see if I can find that really quick because I don't know how I skipped over that one. Sorry. Oh, okay. Anyway, so I just want to go over, it's not age appropriate. The 3 questions that we went over in the thing tells you that it's not appropriate. And this book is for adults and should not be in front of our children. Thank you.
All right, I'm on. Dr. Sullivan, it is time for the public comments. Would you like to read from our missing committee member, please? Do you have the comments from the missing?
I was
Okay.
going to read it at their share time.
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, is
Thank
that
you for
okay?
that. You're right. Thank you so much. You're right. It is time for public comments, not committee comments. My apologies. So we will follow the standard board policy for speakers. It's policy 0169, which allows the number of minutes you'll be able to speak based on how many speakers we have today. Please speak directly into the microphone and address your comments to the committee. The clock is there, so the speaker may keep track of his or her time. When the clock stops, you'll be asked to stop and allow the next speaker his or her turn. We will hear from the speakers in order they signed up, and the comments must address the book for reconsideration, House of Earth and Blood by Sarah Moss. The audience needs to remain quiet so the speaker may be heard. When I call your name, please line up at the east wall of the boardroom, which is where Ms. Beavers was, and then we'll start with the first three speakers. Do you have the list?
I do. I'll just
Perfect.
go ahead and call their names.
Yes, ma'am.
And
Perfect. Yes.
They don't need to line up.
That's fine. Okay,
I
that's
think
fine.
we're good.
All right, sounds good.
This is that informal part of formal.
I like it. Yes, ma'am.
Jennifer Pippin will be our first speaker.
Good morning, and again, thank you very much for being here and doing this. This is a problem across the country and the state, not just in Brevard County. My name is Jennifer Pippin. I have a son that's 13 years old and a daughter that's 16 years old that attends public school. And just like what Michelle was saying, this is rated an adult book. So if our children were to go to a rated R movie and didn't have an adult with them, they would not be able to get into the movie, correct? They have to be 21 to buy tobacco products and lotto cards and things like that. So why is books in the library different from this? If it says adult, it should be available to adults, just as we do with movies, tobacco, lotto, driving a car. All of these things have age appropriateness because children are not able to comprehend or do many of these things. So I know she read one of the excerpts from that. Now, as an adult, did that make you squirm a little bit? Did that make you feel uncomfortable? Now imagine you're a 13-year-old boy or girl that maybe is reading this book because they like horror movies and that's what the cover of this book looks like. Or like Michelle said, maybe they do like this specific author. And then they get to these sexual acts, where many of these are illegal acts, or if they were to do them on school campus, or if they were to do them in the restrooms and on campus, it would be illegal. And we need to get back to the roots for our children. Reading, writing, arithmetic, being kind. This is not kind. Many of these acts in this book are disrespectful to the opposite sex. And when you look at the statutes and the laws that protect children from pornography, this book is the exact reason why these laws are written and why this is an adult book. This has nothing to do with race, the LGBTQ community, anything like that where you see in the media where these books are being targeted. These are young adults doing illegal things. If they were to be here in Brevard County and doing these things, or in school, or at football games, they would not be allowed to do these things, as drinking, underage drinking, having sex, and being disrespectful to each other in their language. They would not be able to do that in the classrooms. They would not be able to do that with sports. So why do we allow this in the libraries? And like Michelle said as well, this belongs, and these books should be donated to the public library for those parents who do feel that maybe their children should be reading this, or they do enjoy the author, and at the parent's discretion. When a child goes to the library, they don't know the content of this book. The parents don't know the content of this book.
Thank you, Mrs. Pippin. Could you wrap up?
Ma'am. So again, please take this into consideration, take the children into consideration, and have a lovely day. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Pippin. The next speaker is Chris Paganoni.
Hello, my name is Chris Paganoni. I'm a father of a 16-year-old girl in high school. She's a junior. Next year, being a senior, she'd have access to this kind of. Let's change the word for a minute. Everybody gets hung up on the word pornography. This book targets carnal fiction, is what it is. It is sexually explicit material set in a fantasy environment. The way I look at this is the scenes that I read through regarding sexual content would violate any code of ethics and code of standards for the school board, or for corporations. If I left this book on these pages opened to these scenes, I'd be visiting HR real quick. I would be fired for having this material on my desk at work. So I really want to make sure we understand, in this book, could these scenes have been removed? A fade to black behavior in writing, which is often used. Is this book diminished if those were faded to black? The answer is no. The content of the book, the storyline, all that would remain intact. You didn't need these sex scenes. These were gratuitous. And they were intended to make money. That's what it's about. We want to make money. She wants eventually probably to make this into a video or movie scene. Netflix won't buy it unless there's a big sex scene in the middle of it. On top of this, we also see scenes of shaming. And a lot of people don't talk about this. They don't talk about the male shaming. Everybody who's in these kind of books, the hero is well endowed. We all know most guys are average. We're not all well endowed. So if you're not well endowed, you can't be a hero. If you're a boy reading this book, you get told you can't be the hero unless you act this way or do these things. Also, much of the sex is gratuitous, meaning, in my opinion, that it's a pleasure sport. These people aren't in committed relationships. We don't teach them that a committed relationship is a good thing. Go have as many partners as you want. Don't talk about the risks of, the many diseases out there that get transmitted sexually. They would talk about things like that. Maybe there's value in the sex discussion. The issue for me is there's no value added by these scenes in this book. It doesn't change the story. It doesn't make the character better. It makes them actually weaker in the real world. A woman that has to use sex to get ahead. How long have we fought against that? How long have everybody in this room fought against that? Using drugs to make sex more pleasurable, or alcohol. What kind of demented mindset is it that we want to say to kids, hey, get high, get drunk, have sex? Never really works out well from the real world. And finally, there's also the concepts of extreme fetish exploration. We understand kids are challenging.
Your time is up.
I thank you for your time, and I look forward to hearing what everyone has to say.
Thank you, Mr. Paganoni. Jennifer Strafford is our next speaker.
Good morning. I am a mother of a 16-year-old daughter. I'm actually the wife of the gentleman that was up here. So I'm just simply going to read some excerpts from the book and see how comfortable you are because some of these books are in our junior high schools. Everybody's saying, well, they're in the section of the high school for like advanced readers or older readers. When you have schools like Cocoa Beach Junior and Senior High, the junior and senior high share a library. Same with Delora and Satellite, which is where my daughter goes. She goes to Satellite. There's Delora. They share a library. So if you have a young, advanced 7th grader, you could have a child as young as 11, reading these books. So here we go. Though the sex was fine, standard, she gotten off, but really had to work at it. Not the same she sometimes liked to work for it. More in the sense of, slow down, put that here, can we switch positions? But she slept with him only twice. She told herself that if she could take some time to find the right rhythm with a partner, even if. Danica had just said it. If he grabs his phone to check his messages before his dick's barely out of you again, please have the self-respect to kick his balls across the room and come home to me. Bryce added, at least he's not some psychopath asshole who will demand a 3-day sex marathon and then call me his mate, lock me in his house, and never let me out again, which was why Reed, human, okay at sex, Reed was perfect. You could use a 3-day sex marathon, Dana put. And then it goes down to talk about that there was just something he needed to feed before he cut. She went up to the sneering fey female and her human plaything and said in a cool voice that would have made even Danica back away, "Like what you see? I'll pay a gold mark to watch you two." He offered Bryce a smile, his vacant face suggesting he was soaring high on some drug. Bryce smirked at the female. "I don't know fey females had gotten so cheap. Word on the street used to be that you could pay us gold by the armful to pretend you're not lifeless as reapers between the sheep." So I yield the rest of my time. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Mrs. Strafford. Our last speaker is Aggie Ramsey.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Aggie Ramsey, and I wasn't even going to speak today. I just came here to kind of listen to the board and committee and to everybody else. But just reading through the excerpts from the book, I felt it was my responsibility to say something as well. Originally, I'm an immigrant. I came from a country that used to be communist. And in my country back then, a lot of the literary works were banned, not published, not allowed to be read. So I'm not here to ban any book per se because I don't agree with that. I think every literary work, bad, good, and different, should be published and available to anybody who wants to read it. But being a mom of an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old boy, or two boys, I feel that it's very important for me to say something. I raise my boys to be good people, to be respectful boys, to be respectful towards their teachers, towards women, to other human beings. When I read the excerpts of this book and I read the language, I was very concerned. So having this book available in the school library is very troubling. For the book to have so many fucks in it, so many explicit sexual verbiage in it, I would not my child at this age to be able to read this book per se. I don't think they're ready for it. And with their developing brains and what happens with the chemistry at that age and with the hormones, it's very concerning to me that this book will be so easily available at a school library where I think more important books should be available to them that cover science, that cover history, that cover STEMs and things that will teach them how to be more productive humans in society. This book should be reserved for the public library, where if a parent truly would like their children at that age to be able to read such a book, then please go to the public library, get that book out of there, and have at it. But when my child spends 8 hours plus at public school, where I'm entrusting the teachers and the school librarian with choosing the appropriate material for them at that age, I don't think this book really belongs in our school library. So please make it available at our public libraries, but maybe not such easily available at our schools.
Mrs. Ramsey, thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
That was our last public speaker. Mrs. Slack, turning it back over to you.
Thank you. Okay, it is time now for each committee member to have his or her opportunity to speak. Each committee member will have the opportunity to speak. Once each member has had his or her chance to speak and any lingering issues will be discussed, then I will call for a vote. I want to remind the audience that this is the time for the committee members to speak and the public is to maintain decorum as previously stated earlier. So do we want to just round robin this, or do you guys just want to just do more open dialogue? What's the comfort level here? You'll need your mics on during the discussion. There's a toggle in the front. We'll go in order. Where would, Mr. Terry? Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry. Thank you. I had that in my notes. So Dr. Tillman will go first.
Okay, my third chair of the good morning. As I mentioned before, Sherry Lynn Diskin, who is the additional committee member, wanted me to let the committee know that had she not recently broken her foot and in the midst of the early stages of doctor's orders, she most certainly would have been here, but asked me to read her statement. And as I mentioned earlier, she is aware, of course, that she cannot vote on the matter by not being here. And these, again, are her words. I had the opportunity to read the complete work of House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas over the course of several weeks. I do not feel the book should be removed from Brevard Public Schools, specifically secondary schools. Reflecting on the material, it is certainly of mature subject matter that is more appropriate for secondary students. Although it may not be best suited for instructional purposes, it does have value for leisure and entertainment. The book does contain strong language, drug use, sexual content, and violence, but it is relevant to the tone of the novel. Moreover, it is embedded within more than 800 pages and is not going to be selected by the casual reader who is seeking to uncover only these specific passages. As well, when the book is read in its entirety, the author's use of language and violence is appropriate for the context. Thank you for the opportunity to share my opinion regarding the first novel. I look forward to joining the committee for the next session. Warmly, Sherry Lynn Diskin.
Thank you. So we're going to go from the top, if that's all right with you, Terry, to, yes, sir, if you'll start off your discussion piece, please.
I have a tendency to be loud, so microphones
Well,
are not necessarily good.
That's fine. We want you to be loud because we have to have the mics for the recording purposes. So as we might can hear you, we have to make sure the mics pick up for the recording.
So I grew up in a time when George Carlin talked about 7 words you can never say on television. It's amazing. It's the exact list that we're looking at here today. I thought that was kind of interesting that things haven't changed in 40 years. The book itself, I have a couple of questions for somebody in the school system. Do we have rating systems? Do we use any sort of mechanism to decide or to limit access to certain books, certain materials within the schools?
Anna, you want to address that? Make sure you're on. Yes, please. Yes.
Okay.
There you go.
According to our district policy, part of the criteria for us to select material is it should have a favorable review and a professional aid, so not from the publisher, because the publisher is in the business of selling the book. So, of course, they're going to be favorable about it. But we, as media specialists, should be looking at professional reviews, and it should have a favorable review for the age group that our school library is serving. That's what I do as the media specialist.
Okay, but
I check the review and make sure that, and that is part of our district policy, that
Correct.
it should
So
have
in
a
the
favorable review for that age.
excuse me, I'm sorry.
No.
In the review, there are recommendations for which age group or age band the book is recommended for. It may say an age or it may say a grade. So the librarians would use that, and they look for summaries, they look for, we call them sublocations, but other words that would describe or give content information about that book before making a judgment whether to purchase the book or not. So we do rely on those professional reviewers, and we've asked that there's at least 2 or 3 favorable reviews before making the decision to purchase the book. Does that answer that question for
well,
you?
what I'm thinking of more is like the movie review, not movie review, but the movie rating system
Right.
on our TVs now. Even on our
Correct.
TVs, we have the ability to look at those shows and find out whether there's adult content, whether there's mature themes. Is that
That's in the reviews typically, or in the
Okay.
descriptions. There's not a rating per se, but it's a recommended either, like I said, age group or a grade level. So there's no a real rating per se. There's no PG plus.
Right.
No, sir.
so then we don't limit who has access to any materials. If it's in, well, somebody said the Cocoa Beach Junior High, Senior High, where my son went to school, anybody in the school has access to that material.
If I could please comment on that. I am the Cocoa Beach Junior Senior Media Specialist.
Yes.
So this is definitely my realm in response to the comment earlier as well. We do have a shared space, and we are, as you're well aware, a 7th through 12th grade school. And we are an IB school in addition to that. So that's an additional piece of information that I need to take into consideration when adding materials to our collection. I personally have overseen the collection for the last 12 years. And although we have a shared space, each and every high school level book is appropriately labeled as high school only. And since I am the only individual that checks books out at that school, I make sure that it is a grade appropriate age level checking out of students. So a middle school student is not allowed to check out a senior high school only book.
I apologize for the interruption. Just for the benefit of the way our public seats are, if I could just add when each member we go around and they state their things, to state their name, at least for the first time. So for example, this whole row, they can't see their name. This whole row, they can't see the name. And so just, you know, again, we're formal but informal. So I'm going to switch seats again.
Thank you.
Okay,
Yes.
by the way, I'm Terry Hagee, for anybody who wants to know.
I did say Terry, but I didn't go, yeah, and I said Anna, but I didn't. That's great.
So
Yeah, yeah.
did I answer your question
Yes,
then at that point?
yes.
I can't speak for other junior, seniors, high schools, obviously, but I'm more than comfortable for speaking from my facility.
So on the, and at some point, if you need to cut me off, just let me know. That's okay. On the documents that we received, I don't know what we call this form, the request for reconsideration of materials, there were 2 high schools listed. Is the book only available in those 2 high schools?
I looked yesterday before we met here today, and they're only available at 2 high schools at this time, correct?
Okay.
And
okay.
there is no ebook access at this time as well.
Okay. So we would be talking about just limiting to those schools. And then would that carry on moving forward to say, once we limit to these schools, then that would kind of translate across the entire school system?
So what you mean by limit is if we had chose to remove the book from the shelves,
Right, right.
it would no longer be accessible at any of the school libraries in the district.
Yeah, if I could
Yes,
come back,
please.
way back here now, just jump in. Those are really good questions. And again,
Yes.
it's our first meeting. So these kind of questions we really anticipated. So thank you for bringing it up. And so in this case, the book is currently available at 2 libraries. If the committee chooses to allow the book to remain in libraries, it is conceivable that a different media could add the book. So conversely, if the committee chooses to remove the book, it would be removed from those 2 libraries, and no library could subsequently purchase the book. And so it is 2 libraries now, but it is making decisions in general for all the libraries in terms of future purchase and access to the book. So that was a really good question, so I appreciate that. Yeah. No, I'm sorry.
We're
Take your
waiting for me.
time.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So I guess just overall comment on reading the book. It is pretty salty. It was a little surprising to me because as I was in that age and reading fantasy books, that language didn't exist at all. So it took me by surprise a little bit. Then I went and watched Game of Thrones, and I said, well, that's not bad. So this, yeah, I'm a little bit torn with the whole thing because it's a good read, and but as I said, a little, yeah, somewhat for a mature audience. Yeah, I think.
Okay. The good thing about these questions too is some of us have the same questions. So we'll be able, so don't hold back on your questions because it'll give us more time to get those other questions out that we may not ask because we're worried about time. So feel free to take your time, ask your questions. We've got some experts in the room, and Dr. Sullivan is definitely here to answer any questions that maybe I can't or somebody from the school level can't answer. So please be sure and ask your questions. Okay, Anna Woodbury. Yeah, I don't know. I don't hear you.
Yeah.
It takes, yeah, there you go. Yep.
All right. I have teacher voice. But anyway. Okay. So I did read the book in its entirety. And
Say your name, please.
Oh, Anna Woodbury.
Thank you.
I did read the book in its entirety, but I also, I've been doing this for 17 years, so I know our district policy, and as I mentioned earlier, it should have a favorable review and a reputable, unbiased, professionally prepared selection aid, and be reviewed as appropriate for the age group our school serving. So I did look up the reviews for this title. The interest level is listed as adult. It's the first in a series. From the publisher, the interest level is adult. The interest level is upper grades. From Booklist Review, Starred Review, the main character, the book is described as the author's adult debut book. The main character is postgraduate. There is not an age recommendation because this is, again, the author's adult debut book. I know she writes books that are popular with our high school students, but this is, it's listed Mass's latest best-selling YA author to pivot to the adult market, and her devoted fans of all ages will be eagerly anticipated this one. But again, another review listed this as YA mature content. Publishers Weekly also stated that this title is an adult debut, and it is written for adult readers. So,
Oh, your mic went out.
oh, mic went out.
All our mics went out. You test your mics. Uh-oh. Dr. Sullivan.
I got nothing.
Testing.
I don't think any of them are.
Check.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah, yes, ma'am.
Yeah, mine is as well.
I'm going to stand just for a second.
Even in our faculty meetings, there's a kind of technical challenge.
Yeah, it's
I
like
get
when
in
you're
there
doing a
early.
Zoom with an author and then the internet goes out. I'm like,
We get in there early, get everything ready. No.
Check.
Panel back here showed they were all.
I'm back.
Which all
I
button,
don't know.
not a restaurant can just stay like that.
Good.
Everything will be fine.
All right, we're back. So we'll go back to Ms. Woodbury, and she was sharing about the reviews.
I don't know when it went out. Hold on.
You were sharing about the reviews and things, ratings and.
Yes. So again, just reading through all the reviews, they all note that this author is making her adult debut, and it's written for adult readers. I did also look up the accessibility at the public library, and I didn't print all that out, but the majority of our public libraries do have it available. So it could still be made available to a young person. Did the mic go out again? It did.
And I feel like I just.
Oh.
I was turning this off, and I'm not knowing, of course, I was turning the universe off. Try again now. Sorry, Mike.
Okay,
Okay.
can you hear me?
I'm not coming
Yeah,
near
no,
this
no,
ever
touching
again.
here, I can hear every bit.
I'm walking away.
Means it is picking up your audio.
Okay.
Is
Continue.
it back?
Yes.
Okay. So I know the majority of our public libraries do have it, so if a reader, because based on the length of this book, the person would be quite the reader to pick that up, they could still pick up that title at the public library.
You finished?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm-
Sounds good. All right. Scott, go ahead and introduce yourself, please.
Good morning, my name.
I'm working, so maybe tilt it up a little bit. Oh, you have to toggle up, turn it on.
Is
Okay. Yes, sir. There you go. Yes, sir.
You hear me now?
I don't know. Do it again.
Hello?
No.
Nope.
Yes, it's working. Just have to speak a little bit closer to the microphone, please.
Thank you.
I'm like Terry, I'm normally loud. So, my name is Scott Rook. I had probably a bunch of questions that I'm hoping we can answer. So, when did BPS purchase the book? Do we know that?
We do, and I do not have that in front of me. I don't have that information right here with me. Do you have it, Anna, by chance? Kelly, do you have it? Thank you.
The publication date is 2021, so I didn't see the date that it was acquired for the collection, but
So it's new.
it would be fairly recent.
Yeah, it definitely, that would be public record for the two high schools that purchased it. We could find that out, but it is a fairly new publication. If I recall, it came out probably December 2020. So depending on when those two high schools
March.
purchased it, within the last 2 years for this particular edition. And then the additional volume after this one, the second one, it's a duality, came out, I think, in March of last year. So
Okay, and do we know how many copies were purchased?
for the district.
Right.
Currently, there are 2 that are available. There were more originally. I could not tell you off the top of my head. I do have records of that at my school. But 4 or 5, I would think. And I believe there was an ebook accessibility at one point that has also been removed. There are several high schools that have removed it from their shelves, and the ebook access has been removed.
Right.
I can add a little clarity to that as well. It was only at one more high school.
Okay.
That one high school chose to remove it.
Was that challenged, or was that the high school made that decision?
Oh, no, the high school made the decision. Whenever a concern is brought, they review it, reflect, check the language, and then they made that choice.
Okay. And do we know how many times that book has been checked out since it's been made available?
You would have to look at the records for each one of those schools. It would be available. But again, without a system with which to look that up, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. I do not own it at my school, so I did not look at the circulation numbers for that particular book because I don't own it at Cocoa Beach. So
Okay. I was just curious
Sure.
how often, how long it's been around, how many times it's been checked out, and
Sure.
by what age group have checked it out. Because if we're making the argument that younger readers are being influenced by it, I would be curious to see the data that shows that younger readers are actually wading through 800 pages, particularly the first 500 that is character development and not most exciting. I would lose interest. if I
there
hadn't.
are records for that, and those media specialists and/or probably Missy could pull those records for you. When you mean younger reader, sorry, I would prefer a definition of what do you consider to be a younger reader? Because I'm a junior senior, so
Well-
like Anna's at a true middle school, for example. So
I don't know whether the definition that was provided is correct or not, but we heard young adult is 12 to 18.
YA.
But I would say a younger reader, even at the high school level, is potentially 14 or 15 years
Sure.
old when you're talking ninth.
Mhm.
And then I know we said that this had, you guys review the professional reviewers, but is there not a banned list, but a not recommended list that's maintained by Florida Department of Education at all? She's looking at you.
Well,
I
feel
really
like
don't
I don't
know
want
that
to dominate because both Anna and I greatly
Right.
respect Anna's experience with this much more than mine. She's been at her position longer than I have as well. So, not to my knowledge, I will answer that in that format. Not to my knowledge, is there a list that is not
No,
recommended?
I don't think so, but again, it would be something that would be reviewed as appropriate and favorable for
Is
our
it-
young people. And I thought about the circulation statistics as well. Those might be skewed because, of course, it was made public when some of these titles came out, and I imagine some of the high school libraries may have been overrun with young people going to check out this book that they had no idea existed. So
I can speak for experience on that one. I had no students asking me about that title
No.
whatsoever.
Okay.
I
And
wouldn't.
I guess,
Go ahead. I'm writing your questions down, so for the next time we meet, I can have this data, so that if you have the same questions, then I can get them
is
for you.
there a similar mechanism? Because the Brevard policy has school challenges or reconsiderations, as well as district level, and I'm curious if there is a state level that's comparable.
Not
So
to
I-
my knowledge, no, sir, because everything is dependent upon the school or the school district to have its own policies in place.
So there is nothing at the state level that prohibits any books.
No,
So
sir,
the
just the
state is
law.
completely silent on
Constitution.
whether a book is appropriate or not.
Correct. And there
Okay.
are no, Brevard Public Schools does not have a list per se or anything like that to give to the librarians.
Yeah,
Okay.
just, an additional clarification, sorry, I keep switching seats. The state, of course, controls statutes and state board rules, and they are process-driven, not individual title-driven. However, with the most recent statute, the state will be maintaining a list of any titles that were challenged and the outcome of those challenged. That format is yet to be determined because it was in the most recent passing of statute. And so there will be a moment in time to be determined where the state will have, I imagine, its own site. So they're not making decisions on titles. They're just going to communicate what has happened in district.
Okay. And then this is probably more process driven, but I understand that this book in particular is only in 2 high schools, not ebook available. And we discussed that for the combined schools where you have a middle school and a high school, you have the ability to restrict it to high school students. I guess my question is, can it be restricted even further by specific grade, or can it be restricted by age? Because I assume on a student ID card, it tells you what grade they are. So if there was ability to say, okay, maybe this book isn't appropriate for 9th graders, but it is available for others, if there's a way when we look at their student ID to restrict access.
So when I check students out, their profile, if you will, comes up because they type in their student ID number, and then their grade is available at that time. Some of the books that we have looked at have had recommendations of 16 plus or 18 plus on the reviews that we've seen from professional reviewers. That is a possibility. That is not currently a district policy, but it is something that could be implemented at media centers, depending on the media specialists' process. So it could be labeled as such. So for example, certain books could be 16 plus for checkout, or we could do senior high level. So it would be only a junior or senior high school student that would be allowed that book to be checked out. Could be labeled as such.
The librarians have a feature in the program that they use where they can add notes. And that's one of the features that a lot of the librarians do already put into practice. So if they feel a book may be more upper high school, they may make that note in there. So when that freshman comes in there, that they pause and take in consideration the student and the book. So that feature's been there for as long as I've been in media, 20 years. So, and then a parent or a family member, a guardian can also make those requests, and the librarians will definitely follow that and put the notes in under that student's name. So there are different ways that book titles or students can have notes put into their account to prevent them from getting possible books.
So if the parent or guardian wanted to restrict access, do they have to do it by title, or can they do it by the age or grade?
However
or-
the parent feels is best for their child.
Okay.
So it could be by topic, genre, author, age, appropriateness.
So there is the opportunity for parents to selectively opt out of their child having access to
Correct.
books.
Most definitely.
Correct.
And then the next question I had was, because we talked about when you're checking the books out in the library, is that same capability available for the digital? Can you restrict, can you block? Because you don't have a librarian that is actually in front of the student when they're checking out a digital copy.
Right. So in Sora, I'm sorry, did you
No,
want to
go
answer
ahead.
that,
No.
Missy? In Sora, which is our e-library, it is done by grade levels. And so, for example, for my junior or senior high, my junior high students only have access to junior high level books. They do not have, even though they're at Cocoa Beach, which is technically a junior senior high, it is restricted by their grade level. So middle schoolers would only see up through middle school titles that are appropriate. And then once they roll into their high school, then they have access to K-12. And I did actually test that with my, at the time, middle schooler, and it worked very well.
And I have spoken to Sora, my contact, and asked what more can be done to help with the ebooks, meaning like we can do that in our hard copy collection. What more can Sora do to help us if parents have those restrictions? So they are working on something to help us help families, to help their students make the selections they approve. But right now, they if you're in high school band, so 9th grade and up, can access the ebook.
And random thought,
Sure.
but you've said middle school can't access the high school, but how do we address students that are reading above grade level? So given that you have IB, AP, you have gifted programs, you have everything else, there are a plethora of students out there that are reading above their grade level. So is there a mechanism for the parents to request access to above? I know we've said we can restrict below.
Definitely.
And just because we're talking about a student reading above their reading level doesn't necessarily mean that the content needs to be adult content.
Correct.
We're talking about reading levels, which we categorize as Lexiles. So when you're talking about a Lexile, and probably Nancy Gray would be also an excellent person to comment on that, because I feel like I've been doing a lot of talking, but it has to do with vocabulary, structure of sentences. So when we're talking about challenging, for example, a student that's perhaps a 7th grade IB student that might have a Lexile of 1,000, we do have books available for those students that are still middle school content appropriate, but do have a much more challenging reading level to help to increase and improve their academic achievement.
And then the last question I had, well, actually I have two, I lied. Just to confirm, this book is not required reading in any classroom. It is just merely available in a library.
That's correct.
Okay. And then the last question, I guess, is maybe directed more towards you because it's more of a policy piece. I know, I had to find you. So in reading the policy, it sounds like the only option we have is thumbs up or thumbs down. There's no opportunity for this group to make recommendations for implementing something where we could restrict things to junior seniors only. There is, but I didn't see in the policy. It looks like this board has to decide yay or nay.
Thank you, Mr. Rook, for that question. And I'm going to respond when I ask that question of Mr. Gibbs to make sure that I am saying it correctly. No, it is our interpretation that this committee could most certainly say a junior senior restriction, meaning 11th or 12th grade. It is our opinion that that is appropriate. Yes, thank you. I got the head shake from Mr. Gibbs. And I do want to just mention something in like processing time from the time of which the petitioner had the information on the school sites, wrote the actual petition, submitted it. Rockledge High School was one of those schools. Rockledge High School no longer has that title. And so I just want to make sure that that was made clear as well. Just kind of for clarification, again, there's informal review. There are times that when we sent out the list of schools for a review, it's physically no longer there, right? School, books kind of walk out of libraries. And so the list being perfect on any given day is an ongoing target, and the media specialist can speak to how many times I keep sending the list out, because sometimes it's a matter of it's in the system, but then when they physically go look, it's not necessarily there either. And so, as I'm sure is in our public libraries as well, that sort of moving target on books. So just wanted to make sure the committee had that updated information in your discussion point today. Thank you.
Melbourne High School is the only school that has it currently?
Correct. According to our current records, yes.
Okay.
I'm gonna throw that little disclaimer out at all times.
Right.
At the time of the petition, it was appeared to be at Rockledge as well, which is why we went ahead and went through the multiple school process, but didn't want to revert a process midstream.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just want to make that point clear as well. So thank you.
So when we get ready to vote, I'm going to need your guidance to help me decide how we want to ask the voting questions, since we've got the okay.
Yeah, I
Okay.
would suggest when you get to the vote, first see where the initial vote is of consensus.
Okay.
And then if one of the committee members wants to propose an alternative, and then the
Perfect.
discussion can go from there.
Sounds good.
And I'm going to rely on Mr. Gibbs for a whole lot of that.
That's great.
Because
Yes.
again, it's the committee process, and we're kind of setting the standard for other meetings in the future.
Absolutely.
I feel like I'm hogging all the time.
Well, the thing is, like she said, this is our first time, so a lot of these questions won't have to be asked over and over. So this is good. We want to get these questions asked and answered the best we can, so that you guys can make informed decisions and know exactly what is and isn't policy, or what is and isn't happening in our schools. So this is good. This is good. Oh, you're marking him out as he goes? Okay.
So, I mean, I kind of agree with Terry. It was salty, but I will say I have heard worse from high school boys lacrosse teams. So whether that makes it right or wrong, I just feel like the children are going to be exposed to it, whether it's on the internet, whether it's in person, or whether it's here. So some of the discussions in the book, drugs, language, even sex, I just feel like the kids are already exposed to that. So I waver on where the line is for what is age appropriate. So that would be what I would want to look at. And that's all I got.
Check. Okay.
Say your name for the group, please.
I'm Paul Rout. Parents, well, let's see, 3 Brevard Schools graduates, and we have a junior still. I'm a Satellite High graduate, so we're both my brothers. So this is all real to me. I'm going to try not to ramble too much, which I have a tendency to do. I didn't come prepared. I just want to talk about some of what I've heard in the room, and I'm going to pretend there's a time. Basically, I think as a matter of principle, a couple of comments came up that were, well, why does this book need to be in the library? And that is fundamentally, I'm going to say, the wrong question to ask. Maybe the right question to ask in North Korea. Here, no. Why does this book need to be removed from a library? Why does this book need to be kept from students is the right question. And there was also commentary on that as well. But that's the presumption that a book needs to prove its worth to be in a library is ludicrous and dangerous. We can keep going that way. There's all sorts of books that I don't like or might offend me. We're going to end up with empty library shelves. And I dare anyone to argue that that's a good result. And I hate slippery slope arguments, and I just made one. Sorry, hyperbole. But as a matter of law, policy, we got the handout here on some of the Florida statutes with obscenity highlighted for some reason, even though nothing in this book has ever come close to anything that any court ever held to be obscene. But the idea that words, mental pictures are harmful to minors in and of themselves is, let's be nice and say, unproven. Also a lot of the relevant laws address, particularly the obscenity side, without value, without literary merit, without educational merit. And the idea that having read excerpts, for example, from the book, and I know that some of you read the whole book, and presumably hopefully we all did, reading excerpts from a book that's not going to give you the sense of a book. I could absolutely pull excerpts from this book where you're going to go, this is very boring. This is a book about cute little animals, and it's a book about people watching a made-up sport while sitting on a couch. That doesn't seem very interesting at all. We could come up with all sorts of representations from the book. So taking it as a whole, which again, the statutes address without merit, I'm forgetting the exact wording, but you can't say that it has no merit based on one excerpt. That's just ridiculous, because again, you can always be selective with your excerpts. And I understand that the excerpts that were chosen were of the material that's of concern to the people who are worried about this book. But again, if you haven't read the whole book, maybe stop and do that before you weigh in on it. But as a matter of preference, do I want my kids reading this book? Well, again, we have a junior and up, so right now, sure, fine. In middle school, honestly, yeah, very probably they would have been okay. Our kids are smart, they're thoughtful, they're educational. We never felt a need to particularly police what they're reading. And here they are, functional adults or near adult. And the idea that you'd have to give me a very good reason to want to take that choice, to take that ability away from other parents. You don't want me coming to Indian River County and deciding what books you can read. You don't want me coming to the private school that your kids might attend and saying, you can't read this. You don't get your kids don't have this in the library. And while they are in the public library, for a lot of kids that isn't as accessible. Public libraries are a wonderful thing, very accessible, but it's not the same as the school where you already are. It's not equivalent. And I get that that's, we're not technically banning a book, but literally we're talking about banning it from the school libraries. From the context we're talking about here, nobody in this room can decide what can be in a public library. Nobody in this room can decide what can be available at the state level. So no, we're not banning it at those levels, but we're talking about the school district. We're talking about the Brevard County school libraries, and we are absolutely talking about banning that book from the Brevard school libraries if we voted that way. So to say we're not talking about banning books, no, literally, in English, that's exactly what you're talking about. I mean, at least admit that, but regardless. Book banning, not something I'm a fan of. And does that mean that every book that ever has been written, I think, should be in a school library? No, but we're talking about this book. I think I had a couple of other, I'm sorry, like I said, this is sort of off. It was brought up that, well, we don't really know the extent of the damage this book might cause, which A, begs the question that that any damage might be caused by reading a book. But B, we don't know, so let's ban the book just in case, even though we don't know, based on the evidence we've just said we don't have. Not the convincing argument you might think it is. And again, different people have different levels of comfort with the language used. I'm not going to be on the fainting couch because my kid read the F word. Because again, if you haven't spent a lot of time around high school students, they're hearing the word anyway. They're hearing all the words anyway. I've found that spending a lot of time around high school students makes me swear less because gets, tiresome. And we're talking about, there was questions about how are books and the regulation of books different from tobacco, lotto, things like that. Well, they're fundamentally different things. For starters, tobacco has actual known damaging consequences. The lottery, as they say, is a tax on people that are bad at math. I don't know that. Sure, our kids great at judgment with money and so forth. No, there's a reason why these things that have actual effects versus, oh no, I read a book. And we were talking about being respectful. Respect came up. Well, respect other parents. Respect my ability and interest and to talk with my kids, to be aware of what they're reading, to guide them, to help them deal with, oh no, they read a book that had the F word in it. And I don't have to be comfortable with everything my kids are reading necessarily. I don't want to sit there and read these passages aloud with my kids, but that's not the standard. I don't want to read, the parts of the book that bothered me and that, interestingly, nobody seems to be objecting to, this is as many, fantasy type novels, and there's battles between angels and demons and things. There's a lot of gory violence in this book, and we're okay with that. But, oh no, someone had consensual sex is the problem. Okay, we have very, very different perspectives. And again, do you want me coming to your school and deciding based on my very different perspective what your kids get to read? Hopefully not. By the way, I don't want to do that. So as we're considering this and other things like it going forward, because apparently there's a lot of this coming, the question I firmly believe is what is the very good reason to decide for an entire school district full of kids and parents, no, thou shalt not have this book. That's it.
Thank you. All right, Shelley, go ahead and introduce your full name for us, please. It takes a couple seconds once it's on.
Sorry about that. There we go. Shelley Colburn, media specialist for Cocoa Beach Junior Senior High School. I also have a 16-year-old daughter who's a junior at the IB program as well. So my perspective is both probably media specialist and a parent in program. A lot of really good points brought up on both sides, and I do understand both sides. As a media specialist, I really feel strongly about not banning books and not removing books from students' access. I think Mr. Rookwitz brought up an excellent point about the idea of possibly labeling some of our books as optional senior level reads. I think that's something that we should explore. I didn't particularly choose to purchase this book for Cocoa Beach Junior Senior High School because she, as an author for our school, is not very popular. So for me, part of my job as a media specialist is to research and provide materials that my students have interest in and are also relevant for the curriculum and study that they are currently doing. It is labeled as an adult fiction book, and she definitely did make that disclaimer very clear to begin with. So excellent points on that side. But really, the reason I chose not to purchase this for, again, my media was because she just isn't a particularly popular author, and I do have her other two series, YA series, but they weren't checked out very often. So I do try to make sure that we provide materials for our students that is of interest and academic growth for them as well. Certainly the content and topic matter and language in the book is falling toward more of a senior high level. I totally will agree with the parents. If you're in a high school hallway, you're hearing a lot in the locker room, on sports teams, and you hear a lot in the library when you think that students are not hearing the media specialist sitting there quietly at her desk. So a lot of this information is probably not new to our students as well. My daughter did read the book, and we had a great discussion after we finished the book. She's actually a Moss fan, so she had read the other two series prior to, and then asked to read this book, and I had no problems with that, and it was an excellent discussion for us as parent and student regarding the content and information in that book. And she actually asked me if she could come and speak today, but I didn't want her missing her classes right now because she's in a pretty rigorous year this year as a junior in IB. She really enjoyed the book, and we had a really great discussion regarding it. It was probably a little uncomfortable for me as a parent to have those discussions, but I was better for it, and I think she was as well. And she quite frankly told me that there was nothing shocking or nothing new in the content of that book that she hasn't been exposed to or heard prior to in multiple other situations. And at least as she commented, the characters in the book were adults in a healthy, reasonably healthy relationship as opposed to some sort of violent act. So that's all I have to share.
Hi, good morning. My name is Nancy Gray, and I am English resource teacher for Brevard Public Schools. And I appreciate all the comments. And I just want to start out by saying we want our students to read. You know, we have a literacy crisis in America. So we want our students to enjoy reading and not just be in a class where they're being told to read, right? I would dare say my library friends, that's their task, right? To give their students things that they want them to read. I was waiting for the term book banning to come up, so I'm glad it came up. And I think we need to define terms. What is it? What is book banning? I know there's a recent group that has redefined book banning, but when you think about book banning in its historical context, that's not America. Book banning is, okay, we make this decision and now we go outside and burn the books, right? And now nobody can have access to buy Crescent City because we have now outlawed the book. So I appreciated the parent who's from a communist country because that is not America. Whatever we decide today, you can download the book right now on your phone if that is what you want to read and if that's what you want your student to read. So we're not talking about book banning. We're talking about objections and deciding what's appropriate for Brevard Public Schools to present to students. Now, as an English teacher, I have had parents object to books that I have taught in the classroom. But that was a conversation I had between me and the parents. And one time my principal actually got involved. It was great. We had a conversation and they understood why I was teaching it. But it was literature. And as an English teacher, I separate literature conversations from popular text like this, to be honest. Now, I was not very happy when I saw the size of the book, as many of you were. And I am not a young adult. This is not young adult, but that's just not my genre, to be honest. But as an employee of Brevard Public Schools and an English teacher, I am in partnership with the parents that I serve. That's my role, right? We are in it together. When I was in the classroom, I gave my parents the list of books that we would be reading throughout, and then they gave me feedback on whether they thought it was appropriate or not. So we need to separate what is being taught in the classroom versus what students have access to. Those are two different things, right? And we've already established this is not being taught in the classroom, right? But as my role, I am a public servant to the students, and I need to be cognizant of what is being provided for them. So I don't really have anything more to say than that, but we need to be aware of the partnership with our parents. Because honestly, that's why we're here. We're here to help our students grow as students, grow in their literacy. That's my role, is to help your students be able to read and write. They don't need this book to do that, right? There's a lot of other books. In fact, I have a whole list of books that you want some really good literature books to read. So that's where I am falling with this because, and I appreciate what Mr. Robb said, because And you guys said it. You, as a parent, you're okay with your children reading it. Bravo. That's a conversation. But it needs to be a conversation with the parent. So we need to figure out what that looks like. And if this one school has parent options, maybe I would be okay with that. But this was not my favorite book I've ever read. But I can see both sides, and I am not a fan of, my parents never censored what I read. Like, I read all kinds of things, right? But my parents were involved in the conversation. So.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Barbara Kelly. I'm the assistant principal at one of the middle schools, and I've been working in Brevard County for 20 years. And prior to becoming an assistant principal 2 years ago, I was actually an English teacher for 18 years. I've taught in the middle school and the high school level. So this is not my genre that I would pick up to read, but I did read the entire book. And being a high school and middle school English teacher, there is a very small niche of students that would read a fantasy book. A lot of them read different genres. Unfortunately, many of them don't read at all. When it comes to a book this size, this would be the reason that they would turn it away. If they were not a reader, they would go and look for the tiniest book in the library to read and pick that book first based on either the size of the book or what the cover looked like before even knowing the content of the book. So for kids that want to read this many pages, that to me as an English teacher is exciting in itself. That being said, I also had 3 students of my own that went through Brevard County schools. My oldest daughter is actually 29 this year, and in 2007 and 8, she was at Delora Middle School. When she was there, she wanted to read, because I was teaching at a high school, junior level, senior level AP books. She was at that level where she could read those, but she wanted to read them in middle school because she wanted to read what the high school students were reading. I am not sure how the policy is now, but back then, for any book she read at Delora, because they shared the library with Satellite, I had to actually give permission for every single book she read. So she actually brought home the name of the book prior for me actually approving it. We didn't have the computer systems that we have nowadays. And I had to actually approve that book prior to her actually checking that book out. So as a parent, I made sure I did my homework and I checked into each of the books that she was going to read before she actually read those books. My middle child was in school when 50 Shades of Grey was popular with the students, and I was teaching high school at the time. Many students came in and was telling me about that book, and I personally read that book because my high school students were very interested in that book. That book was extremely concerning to me. My daughter at the time wanted to read it because her friends were reading, and I would not allow her to read that book because that was not appropriate for her being a 10th grader in high school. So for me, I really feel that having that level where there's a section where it is for adults, which an 18-year-old is considered an adult, so we do have 18-year-olds in our schools, that would be appropriate for somebody that would want this genre and is at that age level. Again, it comes down to the parents knowing what their children read. Same thing with movies. You're not going to let your under 18-year-old go to a movie without either you being there or an older person that you know is going to have them come into the theater with them. Same with video games. There's a lot of video games out there that are actually worse in many, many ways than this book, and it's actually visual for them to see, and they actually control those characters and can do some of the acts that are being done in books actually themselves as the driver of that video game. So for me personally, I would have one question is, do we know if other districts have had this book challenged also? Does anybody know that answer?
I don't know. There's been several books that have been challenged. I don't have a list of every county's challenged.
Yeah.
or what the results were for those.
Okay.
And like I said, at some point in time, the state will put that out.
Right.
That information hasn't been released from the state yet.
Okay.
Correct.
So for me personally, I really feel that, again, if we censor a book and ban a book or restrict a book from a library in the school, and there are those 18-year-olds that cannot get to the public library, that we're actually restricting that for those individuals. So at this point in time, having it in one library right now, and it's a high school, we're not talking about middle schoolers even having access to it. But again, I feel like as a parent of 3 adult children, I really monitored what they were seeing, what they were reading, and I knew everything they were reading. So I did not have to worry it was in the library because I made sure I knew what it was prior to them actually checking it out. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Michael Howell, and
I think you're going to pull your mic just a little. I know it's hard with your papers. Thank you.
my name is Michael Howell. I've read this book in its entirety. I'm a big high fantasy in my genre. Book. Quite a slog. A little shorter. There's based on a couple things I want to. Our task was to assess this book based off the statutes that were given to us. I mean, there are things we've been given Florida laws that were passed to define the terms that we're using. There were Florida laws that were passed to define what is appropriate to be in our schools. Adult is defined as above 18. A minor is defined to be below 18. We can have discretion of opinion on what content is appropriate for your son or daughter, but bounding by the statutes and the law, a minor is below 18. So I'm going to try to use those terms as I continue on through my assessment. Harmful to minors is also defined in the statute. Sexually oriented material is also defined in the statute. Specific sexual activities is also defined in the statute. So those are the things that we need to be weighing the content against, not necessarily what we hear in the locker room, what our kids are talking about. That's the guidelines that we're given. With that said, I appreciate the slippery slope argument, because that is not where we want to go. That is not where we want to find ourselves. If we are sensitive to coarse language, well, coarse language exists. It's against the code of conduct and code of ethics of every Brevard County public school, but that does not mean that it does not need to belong in our literature. We cannot ban something based off, or we cannot remove something based off of coarse language. With that said, there is, I believe, justification to remove this book based off of the statutes that we have been given. I'll say, there was arguments to be made. Well, it's not any different from Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones is not available in Brevard County Public Schools. It's it's not as coarse as 50 Shades of Grey. 50 Shades of Grey is not available in Brevard County Public Schools. The Witcher series, there's actually one book by that author in the Witcher series available in Brevard County Public Schools. Not the entire series, just one of those books. The question of why should we remove this book, I believe, is farther down the line. We're reviewing this book because it was let in the first place. This book, admittedly, by the author, was directed toward an adult audience. She had written young adult series before. Both of those are in Brevard County Public Schools. Whether they were well received or not by the students, whether they're high circulation, is not without merit with regard to what further titles we permit from Sarah Moss. But this title should never have been allowed in. That is why we're reviewing it here. I believe that, I'll go ahead and say I enjoyed reading this book. From a fantasy perspective, it had a very good world building. The character development was simple, but if not, very descript. I enjoyed the plot. It was fairly, I guess I'll say railroading in terms of not a lot of the nuance that you're expecting in, kind of the more, I guess, deeper literature that's available. If some of the material, and I'll say, if 3 sections, maybe 5 sections of this book was not in this book, it would have been a great book, and I would have a different opinion of the book at this moment in time. Course language, sure. It was like you teach in a middle school a new swear word, he's going to say it 220 times in 800 pages. That's what I felt like. As a, obviously in the quote that was given during the public discussion, they had to dial down on it and find new ways to say that word. And that's, that is, I believe, the definition of gratuitous, but that's not why we're reviewing this book. We're reviewing this book due to the sexually explicit nature of some of the scenes and the graphic descriptions of those. As a parent, you get to decide what content is good for your child. As a member of this committee, we get to decide how this relates and how this compares to the statutes that are given. We can't make an opinion based outside of those statutes. And that's the guidelines that we have. I'll say that, I've learned a new word today, lexile. My notes say the vernacular and sentence structure would put this novel written at about a middle school level. Even a quote from Sarah Moss saying there wasn't much different from writing my young adults novels. Despite now being able to get away with more swearing, writing House and Earth was pretty much done in the same process and voice as my young adult books. So the content of this book is similar to that of, I guess I'll say the tone and voice is similar to her young adults novels, added, the excessive swearing, added the sexually explicit material, added the illicit drug use, which we haven't actually talked about either. There's an entire section where they're talking about the various drugs purchased to go out on a night on the town, snorting those drugs from a line, the hallucinations that resulted in those, the hangover afterwards, specifically in a very high tense situation within the book. Additionally, Paul mentioned the gore that was in it. I mean, there's people being, humanoid beings being ripped to shreds. And that's, obviously content to be concerning, but there's not a lot of content with regard, or there's not a lot in the statutes with regard to gore. Sarah Moss, in another interview, not the one that was mentioned in the public inputs, it was from Goodreads magazine, is what was it like to write an epic adult fantasy? Did you have to change parts of your process or voice? And that's where I read, despite more swearing, it was the same process and voice as my young adult books. So the content that was intriguing from the Crystal Thrones or Thrones Crystal, something like that, her young adult series, or even the Crown of Thorns series, that would still be intriguing to those same people, the same individuals who read those books. So it's to capture them and then I'll say expose them to this material, not necessarily on purpose, but it is the same theme, it is the same tone, it is the same. One thing, a couple of points that were brought up is, what's the harm? It's not in high circulation. There's not a lot of people working it. Well, I'll go on a branch of hyperbole here. If Mein Kampf was in our libraries, would we allow it to stay? That is obviously very different from we'll call it a new adult fantasy series, because that is certainly talking about a philosophy that is obviously to the detriment of that person, the society, and cause many atrocities. But why isn't Game of Thrones something that we're talking about? Because it never got in. Why isn't the Witcher series something that we're talking about now? Because it never got in. I would say, based off of the statutes that we have been given as guidelines for our process, and it's not my opinion that matters here, is the opinion of this entire committee. That's why we're voting on this, to determine whether it is to be removed from the shelves of the Brevard County Public or Brevard County Public Schools media. We're not making this unavailable to anybody outside of the public schools. We're not even making it unavailable to anybody within the public schools. They can access this content on, I downloaded it on Audible, listened to it, read through it in my hard copy that I received, and check it out, a mile and a half from my house. So accessibility is not the concern here. The concern here is what we're making available to our students. Just because the vast majority of these students are already exposed to it, we set a tone by allowing them to be continued to exposed to it. Yes, high schoolers now know much more than I did in high school. High schoolers now know probably much more than I do as an adult. That doesn't mean that I need to nudge them in a direction that would make that, proliferate. Now, obviously, an 800-page book is not going to, is going to be one of the least circulated amongst many of the fantasy series. And I agree with that. I started off with very small books and then, gradually got up to the larger ones. But just because it's not it's a low probability does not mean that it is not a potential impact. I would say it goes against statutes. I would also say that material, our opinions of the material doesn't matter. Our opinions of the material as compared to the statute is really what the basis of this conversation should be.
Any other questions or anything else? Yes, sir. Go ahead, Scott. Take just a second after you turn it on for it to. Yeah, closer is better.
I'll move it closer.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so Michael mentioned the statute, so I'd just like to get clarification from Mr. Gibbs to make sure that I'm understanding the statute correctly. So under 847.012 3B, you read through the list. Halfway down, it says explicit detailed verbal descriptions or narrative accounts of sexual excitement or sexual conduct, and that is harmful to minors. Is it safe to assume that means it has to meet both parts of that in order to meet that definition?
That would be my interpretation.
Okay. And then in statute 847.001, the definition number 6 for harmful to minors, which is the requirement of the previous statute we just mentioned. At the end of B, it also says and. So I assume that means it would have to meet all 3 parts of that definition.
Yes, to be a violation under all 3 prongs. Harm.
Okay, so that includes C that says taken as a whole is without serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Yes.
All right. That's okay. Again, I get to scratch things off my list because you asked. Yeah, looking at that 847.001 section again, and I'm going to address something that you said, Michael, that our opinions aren't relevant in some, as opposed to our opinions relevant to the statute, or the material as it relates to the statute, unless the statute explicitly calls out this book as being good or bad. There's some interpretation involved, with any law. But so when we talk about that it needs to be patently offensive to prevailing standards in the adult community, if you have a black and white, non-opinion-based definition of that, let me know, because I don't know of one. And which community, and is it the whole county? Is it public school parents? Is it the children? Anyway, and again, I would take up the taken as a whole is without taken as a whole. Taken as a whole, I guess, is a drum I'm going to keep beating. Taken as a whole is without serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors. Again, a very, very, very subjective question, and what we're here to address. But And I understand part of what you're saying is our opinion of do we like the book or not. You know, we got to read 6 books this year. I happen to enjoy this one. I bet I won't enjoy all of them. A little bummed that the next one is the 5th book in a series, and I have no idea what's going on. But we'll get there. But really, the statutes themselves are very much open to interpretation. And I know that's what we're here to do, but I guess the sort of blanket our opinions don't matter, which you then clarified later, so I don't want to be unfair.
Yeah, and I will say that yes, the statute's harmful, without literary, let me get without literary, as a whole, is without serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value for minors. I would say the key component of that statement is for minors. So that's where I would say that's the key component of that particular statement. But the reason we're even having this conversation is because statute 1006.40, number 3D, that any material purchased pursuant of this section must be free of pornography as defined under the statute, and material provided underneath the statute, suited to students' needs and their ability to comprehend the material present, appropriate for the grade level and age group for which the materials are made available. Even the publisher, even the author, even reviews are saying that it is meant for adults, and by definition that is 18 plus. Now, I'm not saying there's not anybody not 18 plus in the school system, but the reason we're having this conversation is because statute 1006.40 was not followed in bringing this particular book in. Now, I do not believe that was necessarily nefarious. I believe that this was the next in a series of an author that has come up, in the last decade, written some pretty good series as far as the reviews go, pretty well received as far as the public. But we're having this conversation because a previous statute was not, I would say, followed appropriately.
And
again,
you would say being the key part of that sentence.
Yeah, correct. Okay. And I would say it's not that I clarified my statement, but it's not that our opinions don't matter. Our opinions do matter. That's why we're on this committee. That's why we're having this conversation. That's why we're, as a committee, going to vote on it, because each of our opinions, we want to give this book the best possible analysis so that we can determine what's appropriate for our students. And, I would say that for minors is the hard point in that 847.01. And I do not believe that the contents of this book, I would say, again, 3 to 5 sections of this book removed, I would have a very different opinion than I have right now. And that is be for minors. And minors is anybody below 18. So that includes middle schoolers. That includes, obviously we're not talking about elementary school students here, but I believe it not to be appropriate for minor individuals.
Anyone else have anything good for the committee?
Oh, Scott, go ahead. I was waiting for my mic to warm up.
Oh.
So just because the word pornography was brought up, because it's listed in the statute 1006.4, what is that, 3D, says free of pornography material prohibited.
Yep.
That statute does not define pornography. If you go to 847.012, which it references and says material prohibited under that, pornography is not defined there. If you go to 847.001, pornography is not defined there. So we have a very vague statute, which is why I think our opinions do matter. We all have our own interpretation of that, and I don't remember what the senator was that said he'd know it when he sees it, but I think we all have different levels of what we determine that. So that's kind of what we need to consider. Everybody's experiences are going to be a little bit different, so how you frame the world and what you see and experience is going to be different. But the fact that the statutes are completely silent on defining what pornography is makes me question whether that is a viable metric to rule a book in or out.
So,
Go ahead. I'm sorry, you were.
just real quick, the one aspect that we haven't really discussed, we've focused entirely on what we want, what's offensive, what we want to get rid of, what's bad, what we would cut out in order to make it a good book. There's a lot of good in the book that nobody has talked about, which does fall within, does it have appropriate literary standards, meet appropriate literary standards? There's an enormous anti-bullying theme in here, resolving mental health issues, support of friends in grief, messaging around inclusion and exclusion. And I know there's also been conversations about drinking and drugs, but eventually we get to the point where we determine that drinking and drugs are not the answers and they're not the solution. And it reminds me a bit, I hate to keep doing pop culture history, but when I worked in radio a long, long time ago, there was a huge brouhaha over Huey Lewis and the News and a song called I Want a New Drug, which actually had nothing to do with promoting drugs, but because it said I want a new drug, then it was bad. And it was actually talking about how awful drugs are, and I want something completely different than that. So I think that when we look at the book in its entirety, there are redeeming factors. There are very good themes in here, and some good but yeah, it is 800 pages.
I would say I agree with you. There is some themes that are very beneficial, but unfortunately, I would say it's tainted by others. And those themes are also addressed in other fantasy novels. Katniss Everdeen with Hunger Games is a great young adult novel. Less fantasy, more apocalyptic scenarios. I just got done with Wheel of Time. Great, strong female leads in Nynaeve and Egwene. Oppression of caste, class system, and had another one, from the Divergent series. Similar themes, overcoming incredible odds, bullying from another faction, literal factions, and them bullying each other and taking over and making others subservient or even close to genocide of that faction. This isn't the only place they can get positive outlook on those similar themes. And I would say the hook that this book remains held up in the library should not be necessarily the positive themes about it, but the negative things that go against what we would, as according to the statute. And with regard to, the definition of pornography, I agree that there's nothing in there that defines pornography. But material prohibited under 847.02, any book, pamphlet, or magazine, printed matter, however reported, sound recording that contains matter as defined in 847.01, explicit, detailed verbal descriptions or narrative accounts of sexual excitement, sexual content that is harmful to minors. And 847.01 has lots of definitions that I would say are applicable here. The problem with the statute is the and pornography that's not defined. But there's plenty of things that are defined in here. Sorry, grabbed the wrong statute. We'll say sexually oriented material, any book, magazine, article, publication, written matter of any kind, sound recording, skip a few words, exhibits that describes exhibits uncovered human genitals to the public pubic region, lewd, lascivious manner that exhibits human male genitalia in discernible turgid state, even if completely opaque or covered. Specific sexual activities, which include human genitals in a state of arousal. There's talks of the penis and penis erections. They're talking about nipple erections. Acts of human masturbation, intercourse, sodomy, cunnilingus, fellatio, and exerting excretory functions. Had to take care of myself in the shower for months now because of this, as well as mention of sexual toys in the 600 range. I would say the theater of the mind is the most susceptible avenue to consume content. And that is what a book allows you to do. And the descriptions used by Sarah Moss in this puts the theater of the mind in a very specific place, in a very specific manner, so that you can, I would say, absorb these adult-themed scenes.
Okay, so I asked earlier about parents having to opt out of books. So I would offer whether there is an opportunity to do the flip side of that, where you would have to opt in to a particular book. If that is a
The middle schools that share the high school libraries have that, as Shelley was explaining. I know Delora and Satellite follow a very similar policy where the middle schoolers do opt in with approval from the parents. Whether you're asking if parents need to send a letter or a note to their high school saying certain types of topics, books, titles, authors are permitted in their home, is that what you're asking? Any note?
well, I guess what I'm getting at is I'm trying to find a balance between not removing the book from the library while also respecting the parents' wishes of accessibility. So if a book is available in school and we have defined it as being adult material, we still want to make that accessible to some children, because I appreciate your comment that it's available at the public schools, but we have kids that can't take advantage of things like dual enrollment or IB or other schools of choice because they have no mechanism to get there. If they can't get to school, they're not getting to the public library. So I discount the public library argument because, and I appreciate that the public library has lots of ebooks, but not every child has access to a computer or an e-reader or anything of that nature. So the public schools, I just feel like that's where the all kids should have access almost to the same thing that the public schools and to the public libraries. So I guess my concern is for books that are deemed questionable or adult level, if there is an opportunity to, I don't want to say keep them behind the counter, but at least require the parents to opt in to allow them, or the child to be 18 years of age, since they should be able to make their own decisions. And I don't know whether the system allows that. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and actually field that question. We actually do that in quite a few spaces. Right now, it's not obviously district controlled, but in response to some of the concerns and as they review titles, some schools have designated books as parent permission. Some are behind the counter parent permission. That is absolutely allowable, reasonable, appropriate. Some of our combination schools are a little extra careful to where they're actually behind the counter. So any version of that is allowable and is currently in use in spaces. And so there are titles that some schools have designated parent permission, and there are titles that some schools have designated behind the counter based on the content and particularly the age span in the school. So that is certainly a strategy employed in some cases already.
Okay, so currently that is an individual school choice. There is not a district level.
Right, because we don't have a district book thing. So that is certainly within the scope of this committee in regards to this title.
So do the individual schools control the ebook access? Because you just said you don't have district, so each school runs it?
So it's varied. So once an ebook is purchased, it is accessible to that grade band. And so we've, revisited that in training with our media specialists so that they are aware when you're making this decision to buy this book, you're buying it for the entire district's accessibility and grade band. So not all of our titles are ebooks. They have to purchase that. Many of the titles that this committee will be discussing aren't ebooks. We'll give you that information, of course, the ones that are ebook. So ebook is a different story, certainly. But again, this committee can take any of those available avenues in making a decision for this book. And, again, encourage the focus on this book. And so certainly the committee could propose something that is any version of all of those things. It's entirely possible it's employed now.
And if we make a decision for this book, this school, another school decided to purchase the book, it would fall those parameters.
Yeah, correct. This committee is making a district-wide decision. And so although it is currently only in a space that would guide the decisions for media specialists in moving forward as well. And so, that's why it is a district-wide committee, and it is a district process right now. So that's certainly allowable. Miss, did you have a question for me? Yeah, I think that's probably a great time for a break. Why don't everybody shut their mics off? Let's take a little 5-minute break. But I do want to remind the committee members that it is not appropriate to talk to each other. Of course, the many reminders that you've gotten from me, if you could, please keep that in mind and certainly take a break. There are restrooms right in the corridor. And if anybody needs anything, let me know. I can go get a couple bottles of water. I'm going to go get some. All right, thank you. He has like such a good TV voice. I want to bring to the committee's attention a request from the petitioner. The petitioner would like the opportunity for potentially up to a minute at most, because the petitioner was not aware that there was flexibility in the span of decisions that this committee could make, and was wondering, with the committee's permission, would you be willing to hear her for up to a minute? And so a yay, if you raise your hand. Okay, perfect. That was easier than I thought. And I'm going to like trust in your like 60-second intuition, if that's okay.
I've got kids, that's really hard because we're always like, we're going to be on time and they're not. So I just wanted to say the idea that to put books behind the librarian's counter is something that librarians have already opted to do individually in a lot of our libraries. A lot of the stuff that has been challenged has been sent to the librarians, and on their own without any direction from the district, they've decided to put some of these books behind the counter for parent opt-in. And the reason it's a good idea, because if, like you said, if you strongly feel that an adult book that's listed as an adult book needs to be in our library, and there's a very small population that are adult in that library, they can still have access to it. There's no car required to go to the library. There's no online access. They can go check out that book with their parental, and actually they wouldn't even need a parental opt-in at that point because they're an adult. But if you have a 16-year-old and you want to read that book, or a 14-year-old and you want to read that book, that's fine. Parent can opt in. But as parents, we can't be expected to know every book and every genre in the library and be able to tell you this genre, that author, this book, that book. That's not realistic. But once we know a book, in many people's opinion, meets the level of being an adult book that shouldn't be in our library because it's for children, and it even says in some of the statutes, age appropriate. And if it's age appropriate, it wouldn't be an adult book in our kids' library. Oh, I'm sorry. I tried.
Pause. Thank you, Mrs. Beavers.
All right. Yes, thank you for that. It's time for each committee member to cast their vote on whether, I'm going to keep it simple as I know how. In the policy, it's very wordy, so we're going to vote by keep or remove. And if there is a conversation after that initial vote, we can visit that. So I will call you by name, and you'll tell me keep or remove. Is that okay with the committee? That's just easier for record keeping and understanding. Yes, sir.
So then you said, once that decision is made, then we have further discussion? Is that what you just
If needed, yes,
If
sir.
needed, okay.
Yes, sir. If the committee deems that we want to have, because we now know that we have a little bit of flexibility in our decision. Originally, it was we were going to keep or remove. So now that we've learned from our attorney, we have a little bit more flexibility within that vote. Dr. Sullivan?
We're just,
Okay.
discussing, with the plane in the air.
Yes, sir.
We recommend perhaps
Okay.
they have 3 choices.
Okay.
Keep, remove, and then other.
Okay.
And
Okay.
then let's go around the room and see where that lands.
Okay.
And then
I'm making
everybody
notes.
will be gracious enough to give us a pause if we need it. Okay.
Okay, so when I ask you for your vote, just to clarify, you're going to vote to keep the book in the library, and that is all libraries. Remove from all Brevard Public Schools libraries or other, and then that will go back and visit if there's enough votes. Is that what? Okay.
And maybe we all turn our mics on now so we don't have the delay for every person's vote.
Great call. I'm just going down my list. It was in no specific order. So Barbara?
Other.
Paul?
Keep.
Scott?
Other.
Michael?
Remove.
Terry?
Other.
Nancy?
Other.
Anna?
Other.
And Shelley?
Other.
Other. So there were 6 votes for other. 1 keep, and 1 remove. And of course, we know that Sherry wasn't here. So are we having to do this by over half plus 1? For
Over, yeah, more than 50%.
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
We, in our quick decision-making,
Yes.
I would recommend that each of the others have an opportunity to give a suggestion.
Okay.
Have any discussion around that suggestion, go from there.
Sounds good to me. Committee? I'm a non-voting party, so I want to do, what you guys are comfortable with doing. Okay. So we have 6 other, 1 keep and 1 remove. So according to this vote, other will be the deciding factor. But now we got to decide and define what other means. So any conversation about that we need to go ahead and have. So go ahead, Anna.
As far as others concerned, again, I'd go back to the professional review because as a media specialist, that's what I base my decision on when I select a book. It's impossible for me to read all of them. I read a lot of them, but not all of them. And this title is reviewed for adults. So I would say to remove for any student under the age of 18.
So can I phrase that this book would be available for students that are 18 and older?
Correct.
Is that language okay with?
Anna, if I could just clarify, is it your recommendation that it be behind the counter?
Yes, and
Okay, I just want to be really granular. Yes.
Yeah, only if the student were 18, were an adult.
Or parent permission?
Or parent permission.
Okay, I just want to get us to some clear vocabulary for the potential of vote. So behind the counter, parent permission, or student 18 is your recommendation?
Yes.
Why don't we have the others weigh in on that?
I would second that.
I agree.
I agree.
Agree.
Yes.
Yeah, I was going to do a second vote if that's okay. But I want to know what's on the floor to be voted on. Other is behind the counter. This is inclusive. This is not one. It has to be all of these, correct? So behind the counter, 18 and plus with no question because they're adults, but minor with a note. Is that what the other means to everybody?
Parent permission.
Parent permission, yeah.
Or guardian.
That's what I meant.
Yes.
That's what my brain meant anyway. Because it's public records, I want to make sure we all are aware what we are voting for. All right, I'm going to start over then. So we are voting now on other.
And is our response yay or nay for this other?
That's a great question. I think yes or no would work. So yes for other, no for not. Okay. Barbara?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
Scott?
Yes.
Michael?
Yes.
Terry?
Yes.
Nancy?
Yes.
Anna?
Yes.
And Shelley?
Yes.
And that's 100%. That we're all in agreement on how to classify this book.
I just, on behalf of the school board and the superintendents, the gratitude I have for this committee, fantastic discussion, fantastic points brought up by everybody. I'm really proud of the work that you all did, really appreciate it. I'm going to remind you, we've got another book coming, so communication amongst each other, can't happen because you will continue to serve in this capacity. And so I want to thank our audience members for being real positive members of our meeting here today. And I will, in terms of moving forward, I will communicate with the superintendent, the school board, school principals. We'll copy our media specialists on it for it to be effective immediately. And immediately meaning as quickly as the emails can happen and all of that sort of stuff. So just throwing that disclaimer. Thank you very much, each of you, for your participation today. Thank you.
Thank you for your service.
Is adjourned.
You're adjourned.